Chapter 2 Rights in the Indian Constitution, NCERT Class 11, Book Indian Constitution at Work. Hello everyone, welcome back to the lecture today. We are going to discuss the chapter number 2 Rights in the Indian Constitution. A constitution is not merely about creating institutions like legislature, executive, or judiciary. It also puts limits on the government power, and ensures that the citizen enjoy certain basic rights in India. These rights are mainly contained in Part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and they are known as fundamental rights. In this chapter, we will understand what these rights are and how they are protected, what role the judiciary plays in protecting them, and finally how fundamental rights are different from directive principle of state policy. So let's begin. First, let's understand why rights are important. This book gives you the instance of the worker employed during the construction of the Asian Games facilities in 1982. These workers were working under poor condition and, importantly, were being paid less than the minimum wages. So, social scientists approached the Supreme Court and argued that paying less than the legally prescribed minimum wages amounted to the begar or the forced labor. The question should be arised around this. Then Supreme Court accepted this argument and directed the government to ensure that workers receive their rightful wages. So this example tells us what? This tells us that something is very important. Rights are meaningful only when they can actually be implemented and enforced. A right written on paper has very little value if people cannot use it in their everyday lives. Okay. Now let's look another extremely important example. The case of Machal Lalung. Okay. Machal Lalung या फिर we can say Machal Lalung. Whatever the pronunciation is. So he was arrested when he was only 23 years old and was later considered mentally unfit for the standard trials. So doctor declared him fit to stand trial, but unfortunately no proper action was taken by the authorities. So as a result, what happened? He remained in the judicial custody for an astonishing 54 years. He was released in 2005 at the age of 77 after the intervention by the National Human Rights Commission. You should think about this case in such a way that more than half a century of a person's life was spent in the custody without his case being properly heard. And this case highlights the importance of the right to life and personal liberty, and it also reminds us that this right includes the idea of a fair and speedy trial. So rights are not merely the constitutional word, they directly affect the human dignity and everyday life. Okay, so this was the case. So whatever lessons from the example, okay, so what are those? So what do these two examples teach us? Okay, so the first lesson is about rights protect every individual, particularly people who may be socially or economically vulnerable. The second lesson is that violation of the rights can happen in real life, especially when people lack the power or resource to defend themselves. And the third and perhaps most important lesson is that right must not merely be written in the constitution. There must also be institutions, there must be also such institutions which are capable of which have the potential to protect that right and enforce them. Okay, that is why judiciary becomes more important. Okay, when a person's constitutional rights are being violated, courts can intervene and provide the remedies. And therefore, in a democracy, what happens that rights provide individual with the dignity, equality, and justice. Okay, while also placing the limits over the power on the government. Okay, with the help of constitution. So now Bill of Rights. So Bill of Rights, the concept of Bill of Rights is essentially a list of rights that are specifically mentioned and protected by the Constitution. Its purpose is to prevent the government, okay, from acting arbitrarily against any individual. Okay, it also provides a remedy when these rights are violated. So we can remember the ideas in a very simple way. Okay, that is Bill of Rights equals to rights plus constitutional protection plus remedy. So what is that? I repeat that bill of right equals to right plus constitutional protection plus remedy. So it is particularly important in a democracy because it places a limit on the government power and that protects individual freedom and dignity. Fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution performs the similar protective function. Okay, so that is about the bill of rights. Now comes an interesting question, that from whom does a constitution actually protect our right? The answer is potentially from both other individual as well as the private organization and the organs of the state. Okay, these three, okay, individual, from other individual, from certain private organization, and from the state's organ itself. Okay, for example, an individual right may be threatened by another person or a private organization. In such a situation, the individual needs the protection of the government, but another possibilities are also there. When the legislature, executive, or the bureaucracy, or even the judiciary, okay, while performing their function, may themselves act in a such a way so that they violates the individual right. Therefore, the constitution plays important role. It places the obligation on the government, okay, to respect and protect the individual rights. And this is one of the fundamental ideas behind the constitutional democracy, because government itself must operate within the constitutional limits. Okay, so this is all about from whom does the constitution protect. Okay, after that, fundamental rights. So the idea of rights was already important during the India's freedom struggle. Nationalist leaders demanded protection against arbitrary colonial rule. When the constitution was framed, these rights were given a special constitutional status, which are placed in part 3. So why they are called fundamental? The question arises because they are considered essential for an individual's liberty, dignity, and the principle of democracy. Okay, so unlike ordinary legal rights, fundamental rights are guaranteed and protected by the Constitution, and guardian of that is Supreme Court. Okay, they can be enforced through the court. So, however, one most important point to remember is that fundamental rights are not absolute. It comes with a reasonable restriction. The Constitution allows the state to impose the reasonable restriction in certain circumstances. So the basic idea of fundamental right is to protecting the individual, but individual freedom must also coexist with the larger interest of the society and the state. Okay, after that, the 6 categories of the fundamental rights. So first is the right to equality. Okay, right to equality, which focuses on the equality before the law, protection against the discrimination, and equality of opportunity. Second one is right to freedom, which includes the important freedoms such as speech and expression, peacefully assembly, association, movement, residence, and profession. The third right is right against exploitation, which prohibits the practices such as trafficking, forced labor, and protect child from the hazardous employment or child labor. Okay, not abuse, it's child labor. Then fourth is right to freedom of religion. Then what happens? Right to freedom of religion, which gives individual freedom of conscience and the freedom to profess, practice, propagate any religion subject to the constitutional limitations, not harming the constitution entity. Fifth is the cultural and educational right, which protects the language, culture, and the educational interest of the minorities. And finally, we have right to constitutional remedies, which is Article 32. You can see all the numbers of the article which I have mentioned in my slide. So you can see it from there. Now after that, what is and finally the third last one is the right to constitutional remedy. So this is particularly important because it allows citizen to approach the courts when their fundamental rights are being violated. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar famously described this right as the heart and soul of the constitution. Okay, so remember the 6 categories. That equality first section says equality, second freedom, third exploitation, fourth religion, fifth culture and educational rights, and then after constitutional remedies. Okay, now it's time for limitations on fundamental rights. So fundamental rights are extremely important, we all know, but they are not unlimited or absolute. Why? Because one person's freedom cannot be allowed to completely restore another person's freedom. No, it's so wrong or threaten the society. Therefore, the constitution permits the state to impose the reasonable restriction in certain situations. For example, restriction may be related to public order, morality, security of the state, sovereignty and integrity of the India, and another constitutionally recognized grounds. Take freedom of speech as an example. Okay, you have right to express your views on anything or about anything. Okay, but this freedom operates within certain constitutional ambit or certain constitutional limits. Okay, and that restriction, that limits. Similarly, the freedom to assemble is the subject that requirement the assemblies should be peaceful and without any arms. So larger idea is about finding a balance between individual right and the collective interest. Okay, and that balance is very essential for the functioning of democracy. Okay, people, so that brings us to the central message of the chapter, is that fundamental rights protect individual liberty and dignity, while constitution also ensures that these freedoms operate within a democratic and constitutional framework. So that's all. Okay, that's all for this part of the rights in the Indian Constitution. In the next part, we can go deeper in each of the fundamental rights, especially rights to equality, right to freedom, right against exploitation, but in our future classes. Okay, so keep revising, keep connecting the article with the example, and most importantly, understand the constitutional logic behind the rights rather than simply memorizing them. Thank you. I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye bye. Kindly like, share, and subscribe.